In a quiet study in Switzerland, in the year 1939, Carl Jung wrote something that would challenge everything we think about who we are. After decades of treating patients and exploring the depths of human consciousness, he encountered an ancient truth that seemed impossible, a 2,500-year-old teaching of the Buddha that suggested the self he had spent his life studying might not exist at all. Yet Jung wasn't deterred. Instead, he wrote, the most sensible and most direct of all religions. What did this giant of Western psychology see in Buddhist teachings? And more importantly, what happens when these two profound perspectives on human consciousness collide? The tension between these ideas holds the key to unlocking a deeper truth, one that can shift the very foundation of how we understand the mind. Picture two moments in history. First, beneath the Bodhi tree in ancient India, where Siddhartha Gautama realizes the truth of no self, that our sense of a permanent, unchanging identity is merely an illusion. This radical insight would become one of Buddhism's core teachings. Now fast forward to the early 20th century. Carl Jung, already famous for his revolutionary work on the human psyche, sits in his study surrounded by Eastern texts. He's developing his theory of the self as the center of psychological wholeness, a concept that seems, on the surface, to be the exact opposite of Buddhist teaching. And yet, both perspectives, separated by time, geography, and tradition, have helped countless people find healing and inner peace. Both are supported by modern research, and both seem to reveal something essential about who we are. How can this be? We're about to see how Jung and the Buddha each developed their revolutionary insights, what they really meant by self and no self, and the surprising ways these ideas not only coexist, but complement each other. This is more than just philosophy. It's a path with practical power to transform how you live each day. Let's turn back the clock to understand the historical context that shaped these ideas. Our story begins in the vibrant intellectual atmosphere of 19th century Germany, where a young philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer first introduced Buddhist ideas to Western thinkers. His work would later captivate a young Carl Jung, opening his mind to Eastern wisdom and the possibility that truth might lie beyond the boundaries of traditional Western psychology. Jung later wrote in his memoirs, Schopenhauer was the first to speak of the suffering of the world, which visibly and glaringly surrounds us, and of confusion, passion, evil. This early exposure set the stage for Jung's lifelong fascination with Eastern thought. The connection deepened in 1909 when Jung met Richard Wilhelm, the renowned translator of Chinese classics. Through this friendship, Jung gained unprecedented access to Eastern philosophical texts, marking a turning point in his understanding of the psyche. From 1909 to 1914, Jung immersed himself in these teachings, devoting hours each morning to studying Sanskrit. His letters from this time reveal an increasing fascination with Buddhist concepts, particularly their uncanny parallels with the inner experiences described by his patients. By 1920, Jung had assembled one of Europe's most comprehensive private collections of Buddhist texts, including rare Tibetan manuscripts. 25 centuries earlier, on the Gangetic plain of ancient India, a different revelation had taken place. Prince Siddhartha Gautama, after years of relentless inner search, experienced a profound awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. His insight into no self was not a philosophical conclusion, but a direct realization born from deep meditation. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, he declared that none of the five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, or consciousness, could be considered the self. This pivotal insight, occurring around 485 BCE, led to his enlightenment. Within weeks, he gave the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta at Sarnath, laying the foundation of Buddhist thought. 5 years later, the teaching of Anatta, the doctrine of no self, emerged fully formed in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta at Varanasi. As steamships and telegraphs began connecting the globe, cultural exchange accelerated during Jung's lifetime. Buddhist texts, once rare in Europe, now arrived in growing numbers. Jung's personal library in Kusnacht filled with Sanskrit and Pali translations, commentaries, and philosophical treatises. But he was no passive scholar. His analytical psychology emerged in response to global change and profound personal inquiry. In his Swiss clinic, Jung began to notice patterns in his patients' dreams and behaviors that closely matched descriptions from Buddhist teachings on consciousness and ego. In clinical notes from 1925, he observed that patients often reported states resembling those achieved through deep meditation, detachment, spacious awareness, and dissolution of the self-image. This convergence was no accident. Both Jung and the Buddha asked the same essential questions. What causes suffering? What is the self? Their methods differed. Jung through psychoanalysis, the Buddha through meditative introspection, but their answers began to align. What makes this even more remarkable is the personal journey that shaped Jung's insights. During a period of deep psychological crisis, documented in his Red Book, Jung underwent an inner transformation not unlike the Buddha's. He later reflected, "I had to understand that I am what I am, and I can only become what I am." But while Buddha expressed his realizations through the language of Dharma and dependent origination, Jung spoke in terms of archetypes, symbols, and the collective unconscious. These vocabularies can obscure their shared understanding. So what did Jung mean by the self? In his 1951 work Ion, he defined it as something far beyond our daily personality. The self, he wrote, is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. For Jung, the ego is just the visible tip of a much larger, unseen psychological system. Beneath it lies a vast reservoir, not just of repressed memories, but of universal patterns he called archetypes. These archetypes, he observed, appeared spontaneously in the dreams and drawings of patients from all backgrounds, even those with no exposure to Eastern traditions. In one striking case, a businessman dreamt of a luminous crystal at the bottom of a deep well. Jung recognized this as a symbol of the self, what some Buddhist texts describe as the diamond body, or Vajra. Jung's view of the self was not fixed. In Psychology and Alchemy, he describes it as a dynamic process, a lifelong unfolding called individuation, where unconscious aspects of the psyche are gradually brought into awareness. This process, he believed, leads toward integration and wholeness. Jung mapped this journey in distinct phases. First, the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, then the anima, or animus, the inner feminine or masculine energy, and finally, self-realization, a state bearing striking resemblance to Buddhist enlightenment. His extensive studies in mythology, alchemy, and world religions supported this framework. In countless dreams and visions recorded in his practice, patients depicted radiant centers, wheels, or circles symbolizing unity, transcendence, and integration. One dream described a glowing center surrounded by darkness, mirroring Tibetan mandalas, even though the patient had never encountered Buddhist imagery. For Jung, the self is both the origin and destination. As he wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the self is a God image, a guiding force, the regulating center of the psyche. And yet, paradoxically, this sacred center contains all opposites: light and dark, good and evil, conscious and unconscious. Jung's later writings reflect a more nuanced view, one that draws closer to Buddhist thought. In his foreword to D.T. Suzuki's work, he acknowledged that what Buddhists call emptiness, we might understand as the ultimate ground of psychic reality.